Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, as I've supported men in their love and work lives for 15 years now, many men ask for the right words to say to be more successful, attractive, and desirable. But I found it's not so simple as giving scripts or lines because every man is different. So giving words or scripts would be like giving a tall, thin man a shorter, wider man's pants, or vice versa. The words have to make sense for you and your personality, and there's so much happening beneath the surface that people are responding to. If you're interested in how to become a better lover and leader in your own unique way, go to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz, or you can text ALIVE to 44144. It only takes a couple minutes and you'll start to get an idea of how you can be both more respected and desired. After you fill it out, we can schedule a time to review your quiz and talk about your specific challenges and desires. So again, go to either shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text ALIVE to 44144. That's ALIVE to 44144. Enjoy this episode of Man Alive. Hello and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I am your host, Shana James, and today's podcast is going to be about flow. And we can look at flow from a bunch of different perspectives. We're going to talk about getting into the flow state and what that means day to day, and also what's happening in the larger cultural evolutionary phenomena and how we can either be in flow or out of flow. And today's guest is an amazing human being who I have just recently started to come to know. His name is Oren Harris. Oren, thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
Yeah. And I'm excited too to talk about, particularly how flow impacts men or how men relate to flow, and all of these pieces are going to be powerful.
Yes.
So give us a little hint or a little moment of how did you find flow? We should maybe start with how do you describe flow, but then how did you come to it?
Yeah, I would describe flow, and even the word, like we've heard the word flow or flow state. It's like you say it's a state of consciousness. I think there's how we experience the flow, which is mostly what we talk about, the stories that we tell, the things that we're captivated by, like being in the right place at the right time, connected to the right people, unplanned synchronicities happening, higher forms of intelligence, spontaneous genius, what we would call magic, from our human perspective, things that are unexplainable, ineffable, that's things that happen when we're in flow, right? And are the kind of obvious things that we're attracted to that feel empowering. Going a level deeper than that, I shouldn't say deeper, but just like what is actually flow? Yeah. I feel like when we're in flow, we are in a state of interconnectedness with life, with the universe, with nature, and with our true nature. And when I say true nature, just to put some more tangibility to that, our true self, whatever you want to call that which exists, the unconditioned self, like the self that we can tune into, slip into, tap into, where we're not as subject to our conditioning, our limiting beliefs, our limiting self-concept. So when we're in flow, somehow, some way, deliberately, accidentally, by an act of wisdom, a stroke of grace, divine intervention, somehow we've gotten the thing that we call ourself that has all of our ideas and limiting ideas. We've gotten out of the way of that enough to where our consciousness expands, our awareness expands, our perception expands, our receptivity expands. And then when that which is already true, which is we are connected to life, we are connected to the universe, we are participating in some level, even if it's unconscious, in this dance. When we're in flow, we've essentially opened ourselves up to receive and experience things that naturally are already happening. So when we're not in flow, it's not that the magic or the connectivity or
right isn't happening. It's actually there.
It's still happening. It's like a radio station. It's like if you're listening to 95.5 and you're listening to hip hop, and then you go to 100.6 and you're listening to classical, the hip hop station is still there.
Still there. Yeah.
It's just a different station.
Yeah. I just had this image too of going from a city and looking at the sky to then going into the country, and seeing like the entire Milky Way, and right, all those stars are still there, even if we can't see them, or that depth and that blackness, it's all still there, even if we're not in touch with it.
Exactly. So the flow is the same way. And I'd also want to note that that's an important understanding in any angle or pursuit of experiencing more flow, however you approach that. We're going to talk about some of that. It's important to realize that you can go with the flow, you can go against the flow, you can allow the flow, you can block the flow, you can tune into the flow, you can tune out of the flow, but the flow is, and it's not going away. And this, I guess this is my first significant insight that of a perspective that will help you experience more flow, and you're not gaining the flow and you're not losing the flow. Like on a personal level of like, I did something right to tap into.
Now I got the flow.
Now I got the flow. Oh, I'm not in the flow. I must have done something wrong. As if that's, so I guess I just maybe dispelled two potential myths there, or ideas about the flow right off the bat. We're not earning flow. We're not gaining it. We're not losing it. We're not earning it. We're not being worthy of it.
Yes. And so if it's not that right, wrong paradigm, what is it?
Well, I mean, one thing that exists beyond right and wrong in terms of a judgmental right and wrong, meaning is love, right? And this is a good segue into what we briefly talked about, is like, what role does the heart play in flow?
Yeah.
Right. So I described us being in flow as being beyond our conditions, our conditioned self, but how I'd also describe that space inside of us is like being in more of our natural state. What is our natural state? When we're not in fear or lack or judgment or
anxiety, or right, all of this.
What's natural in that is love. Not necessarily love like warm fuzzy, but just love, innocence, openness, right? Compassion. These are states of being that when we feel safe, when we're not caught up in, the story and when we're in that state of consciousness, we are more so allowing our hearts to be open, and we're allowing love. So our space is open, and that is very much conducive to flow. And that's why if we want to experience more flow, but we approach it dualistically, like I'm right, I'm wrong, I'm earning, then that's actually a good way to block flow from happening.
Right. Yes.
Is a belief that, because flow, it's almost like flow and love. I'm trying to make a correlation. Love, how I know love is like, it's such a open for interpretation word, but I think we can generally agree in the idea of unconditional love means without conditions. It means that love, the love of source, God, the creator, love, from a perspective of love, it loves everything equally. Yeah.
Okay. So as I'm sitting here, I know the state of being beyond my conditions, right? And for some people, I think they wouldn't necessarily say it like that. It's like, oh, I know what I felt like when the inner critic turns off, or when I'm not judging someone, or I'm not angry at someone. But from a lot of people, it can seem like the jump to loving openness is far. It's like a chasm, right? Of like, well, yeah, but that's almost not real. Where I grew up, it was like, that was when I had those experiences of that kind of openness and love. That was kind of naive or innocent. And so I don't know if you want to pick that one up, or if we want to keep going on to something else, but I am kind of curious about that for people who are like, well, that's a little farther than I know how to get to.
Well, that's a great question. Well, let's look at the immediate access points that still have you in alignment or able to receive flow.
Yeah.
Truth is an immediate access point, and vulnerability is because you can allow yourself to tune into truth or vulnerability independent of how amazing you feel or how horrible you feel. That is accessible to you immediately.
Yeah.
And by truth, I don't mean like the truth or argue against what's the truth, what's not. I just mean the isness of what is happening in the experience.
Right. I mean, that part I know so well too, where you're with someone and there's kind of a shared reality, I call it, right? Where you don't even necessarily have to agree, but you get a sense of what's actually happening right here in this moment. Or suddenly I'm sad, but it's so real that, it's not my facade. It's not the thing I'm trying to protect or defend. Like suddenly I feel the depth of the grief or sadness. And that kind of truth does feel like, oh, the flow is there in a way.
It is, because as soon as you go from resisting, like let's just say the sadness, or avoiding it, acting like it's not there, suppressing it, as soon as you go from suppression and you move into acknowledgement and vulnerability, then what happens is you're releasing the tension, the resistance from feeling that. And when you release resistance, more energy is in motion, and energy in motion is flow. Now your mind might be like, yeah, but I feel sad. This doesn't feel like peak performance consciousness and, being a superhero. But it's still the access point to flow.
Yes.
Because your consciousness is opening up as you're releasing resistance, and your consciousness opening up is one of the things that is happening somehow when you're in flow.
Yes. Okay. So, can you bring this to men also? Because I think this is so powerful. And a lot of the men I work with, have been raised in the man box and the don't look weak and don't have your feelings and all of that. So
yes,
tie that together too.
Yeah, I'll take you through a very quick story of a man who reached out to me, actually the husband of a really good friend of mine. And he's the CEO of this company. And when COVID was happening, they were just like kind of under attack in a way by the public, just because of the positioning of their company. I won't go into the details of that. Anyway, he's like trying to put out fires in the office place and get his team empowered and get on and just like problem solve in a really intense situation. And she kept saying, reach out to Oren. I reach out to Oren. So he finally reaches out to me. Turns out his name is his name's Oren too.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Their family calls me the Black Oren, which is appropriate. As like I said, the other Oren.
Hilarious.
Yeah, it is hilarious. It's adorable. Anyway, so when he reaches out to me, and I'm going to tie this all together. This is perfect here. And when he reached out to me, I said, what's going on? So he tells me the life situation. He's like, here's what's going on in the office. Here's the challenge.
All the external, right?
Here's the challenge, and here's my goal, and help. Right. And so he's trying to perform. I'm just trying to put like the masculine creates, it problem solves. It's like, it's the creator. It's the active focus. I can, I will, I do, I solve, I'm resourceful. That's the masculine. That's performance. And so when I asked him, I said, oh, how do you feel? He's like, I feel overwhelmed. How else do you feel? He says frustrated. But when he said frustrated, I said, tell me a little bit more about the frustration. He's like, I'm frustrated because this is what's happening. He's kind of like, I told you why I'm frustrated.
I told you all this stuff is happening. Why would I not be frustrated?
Why not be frustrated? I said, can you just feel frustrated for a moment? And that initially frustrated him because he's like, I am feeling frustrated. Right. Like, what are you talking about? Right. And I said, I understand why you're saying you're feeling frustrated because you feel frustration, but can you put down the goal for a moment? Because what's happening is you're feeling frustration, but you're also fixated. Your attention, your presence is on problem solving. So 60% of your, or most of your presence, most of your presence is on problem solving. It's not on frustration. So you're not actually giving full presence to the frustration.
Yes.
And he understood that. So I said, just,
for a moment,
just for a moment, let's just drop that. So I felt him do that, and he did that. And I kind of guided him to express the frustration just for the sake of expressing the frustration.
Yep.
So he did that for a couple of minutes, and there's already, and I'm tying this all together, right?
I feel it.
There's already more flow potential happening, right? So then beneath the frustration, I said, okay, why are you frustrated? And he said, well, because of what's happening. I'm like, okay, but within that, what's the source of your frustration? He's like, I can't figure it out. He's like, I haven't solved this. And I said, how do you feel about
not being able to
figure
solve.
it out, not being able to solve it. And he's like,
I hate it.
I feel frustrated. I was like, I don't like it. He's like, and then I kind of like channeled his subconscious or like what he was saying to himself inside. And I asked again, I said, how do you feel about the fact that you can't figure this out?
Mm-hmm.
And then that brought the next layer of texture beneath it, which was shame.
Yes.
And then once the shame was present and it came through these three words, like, I don't know, and how that was not the situation of not knowing, but what that means and how he feels about not knowing how to figure it out. This is where the heart's coming in now, which was not being addressed. Just because he was frustrated and problem solving, it doesn't mean there was any attention to the heart. So as soon as we moved through the frustration and down into the feeling of shame, he's like, I feel shame. Now it's connecting to whatever conditioning, or whatever childhood experience where, he
had to know and get it right to be loved. And
exactly. And so, and I shared this with him afterwards, and I'll share it here just for deeper understanding, is that when we develop some of our strengths, our true strengths out of trauma, and it turns into an identity, then now not only is he a powerful CEO who's highly capable, there's an energy of judgment and expectation and a value judgment that means I'm valuable, AKA means I'm worthy of love. That's that's going on in the subconsciousness. So outside of the practical aspect of being valuable and capable and whatever is I deserve love.
Because
I am,
or being able to solve this problem.
Right. Which means that the opposite is the duality of it. If I can't, then something is not as valuable about me as a human.
Yes.
And just being in that space and kind of witnessing that with him in the space, let me slow down here.
Yeah.
The space being a space of love, just meaning that I was witnessing him from a place of non-judgment and acceptance, which made it safe to illuminate the shame that was actually existing inside of him, that perhaps for the 2 months that he was trying to solve this problem, he was completely unaware of, that part of his power, part of his flow power was being used to avoid feeling shame.
This is such a great example for men. Thank you. I'm really appreciating this.
So just within like minutes of actually feeling the shame, specifically in the space of love and acceptance, then that's where the real transformation started happening, because then it released the judgment. It started releasing the resistance to feeling it by just feeling it in the presence of love with an open heart. And it opened his heart. And so then it released a lot of resistance. And then in releasing the resistance, the channel is more open now. The flow's coming in. And then within seconds, a genius idea to solve the whole problem comes in. So he's like winning. And then to reinforce the love and the power of his heart and to encourage him to continue developing whatever just happened here. I asked him, I said, why do you think that just came to you?
Yeah.
That it seems obvious now that it came to you, like, oh, I'll just do X, Y, Z, and that will be the most efficient way to solve this problem. It's like a genius idea. I said that idea was already in you. It was in the flow, right?
It was in the flow, and it was being blocked by all the resistance and the shame and the...
Exactly. So you could essentially say he was back in the flow and receptive to intuition, receptive to more intelligence available to solve the problem. And what I'm describing here is that whatever constriction around the heart or resistance around these emotions, the way that plays out with the masculine is if the masculine starts to create an identity and reinforce significance or value from that identity, then of course there's a certain level of power that can be sourced from that, and ability to succeed and to excel and to push through and to push. But at the point that comes where it's going to be more intelligent or another idea that is coming from the unknown to try to, empower you, if you have an identity that I'm the guy who knows. If that's part of your identity, then you're of course going to be at some point very limited in your resources, even though from the point of view of, if you're in it, you're like, I'm powerful. And if I don't know, I'll find out. If I don't know, I'll find out. So that is a masculine characteristic and quality, but we're talking about the purity of it. Purity just meaning that the pure divine quality of resourcefulness in its purest state, it's transcendent of our identity,
our ego, our identity. Yes.
Right. That's when it's at its most powerful. So there has to be a kind of humility to be able to access the full power of being fully capable and being a fully high performing individual.
Yes.
And part of that humility happens through these energies like vulnerability, right?
And through recognizing or being willing to admit, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
And to be in that vulnerability of, I don't know, when you're in that space, then to be in that, it really starts to disrupt these false ideas that we
just thinking that, right? The ideas of like, oh, I'm going to be fired, or this is, this person's going to leave me, or this isn't going to work out, or all the things that we think we actually know about our future based on this fear or this concern.
Exactly. And yeah, exactly. It dissolves those, and it dissolves things that just simply aren't true. Like, if I don't know, or if I'm feeling shame, then that means I'm weak. I'm incapable. Right. I know I'm not saying this as a judgment, but that's absurd.
Absurd. I love it.
You know what I mean? It's like, and whatever misbelief about the opposite, or the whatever lack of awareness of like the actual courage and strength and power that being willing to be vulnerable is. Like, that's not casual. Like, that actually takes a strength.
Strength. It really does.
That gets, when you look at it through judgment, it looks like a weakness, but that's absurd too, because of what it actually takes.
Yes.
It actually takes as much strength, if not
so
more.
Much strength. Yes. To open into that vulnerable or permeable state.
I feel vulnerable right now as a masculine presence or whatever. I don't know. I feel vulnerable. I feel ashamed. That, to me, is not only not weak, but that's incredibly strong. So it's kind of like the whole thing's
here,
right? And that dynamic, this phenomenon that we're talking about, definitely plays a role in how much flow one can access, how consistently, and how much at will one can tap into the flow. If you want to get into like that kind of bold statement, like tap into the flow at will, in my experience, you won't even get close to that level of empowerment with flow if you're not acknowledging the heart and the things that and the love and because those are all things that can block the flow if we have a resistance.
Do you find
on our emotional state, and then that's a flow blocker for sure.
Yeah. I'm wondering what the connection is between the willingness to experience a kind of helplessness and tapping into, the actual, like the flow state of true nature, right? Like, we've got this will, or this kind of false will that for some people is very strong, like you said, and takes them to a certain point and they can run companies and whatever. And it seems like maybe not until there's a moment of helplessness does the humility come in, or maybe even longer than a moment.
Right.
And so I'm curious about that. Yeah, that sense of helplessness that I think a lot of men are like, that is what I definitely do not want to feel. That's not manly.
And ironically, that's also an access point to flow in the lower depths. It's like, the obvious, or maybe not obvious, but access points to flow in terms of like inspiration and clarity and all these things. I think it's less known or less understood, the access points to flow. It's almost like if you're at the top or if you're at the bottom, you're equally as close to the flow. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yep.
Because of the one commonality there's a level when you're in a state of helplessness, then it's like a forced surrender.
Yes.
And a forced surrender is a forced opening because it's a release of resistance. It's like, so the part of us that's trying to control and avoiding and in fear goes to rest when we're in a forced surrender, and helplessness will do that. Of course, if you're in it and you're fighting with everything you've got and you feel like you're dying,
that is miserable.
Then it's miserable. And what we're pointing to might sound ludicrous. Like, oh, hey, you're right at the heavenly gates. Do you know what I mean? Or like, hey, keep going. You think you're at rock bottom. Oh, great. You're at rock bottom. Something's going to open. Like that's for most people. It
sounds ludicrous, but it actually happens. Right? I mean, in my spiritual practice, there is the experience of being willing to feel, right? All the things that we try to avoid feeling. And it is called a hole. And actually the willingness to go into the hole. And I've kind of popped out the other side of that, that dark, dank, helpless place. And suddenly there is love, and it can be shocking.
For sure. And I think that, if I were to look at this as a development, then over time, and this would be considered a more advanced idea and definitely more scary, but just kind of point to it. And I think this will make sense even logically, is if you go right to the edge and then you, with all of your force of your will, or you get kicked over the edge and you leap, and then something good comes out of it, that's like the net appears, right? Like, oh, wow, that actually wound up being good. Eventually, if you keep leaping and then the net appears, eventually you realize you realize you can fly, or you realize the net's always there. You realize, I could go all the way deep with that, but that eventually that happens. And I'm saying that to say that I would encourage someone developing that. And by that, I mean a state to find the power and where the empowerment is within helplessness. Instead of investing energy in avoiding it at all costs, that actually takes energy, right? So even if it's really uncomfortable, especially if it's showing up, you might as well engage it, because the very engaging of it releases the resistance to it, right? Yeah. And the example I gave with the CEO guy, he didn't realize that for months, maybe for years, in the background of his consciousness, his precious life force power, unconscious is, and part of that power is also what unlocks flow, is being used to avoid failing in a certain way, but more so to avoid the feeling of shame.
Yes.
And then in just a few minutes of actually feeling shame and being with it with some level of acceptance. I said the word love, but even acceptance could work. Some level of acceptance, friendliness, curiosity, like, hey, like I'm here for you, that is massively transformational. And what I'm pointing to here is that you don't have to be forced, like in his situations, like it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Yes. You don't have to be forced into the depths of hell. We consciously went into the depths of hell. And all I'm saying is that at some point you could approach it that way and be willing to go as deep as you can.
Yes.
But just the willingness to, because ultimately it's going to wind up happening some way, somehow, at some point, in some form.
Right. If you actually consciously choose it, it becomes less of a crisis when some of those things happen.
Like I say sometimes, listen to the whispers before they become screams. If you're like, man, I don't like this scream, this catastrophe, this thing. Okay, well, that's also a sign that there's several whispers along the way that you didn't listen to. So now you got to deal with the scream. Now you got to do, and I guess this is another important perspective to share, is that just because things unfold in our conscious awareness of like, oh, now this makes sense, it doesn't mean that the signs were not there along the way just because we didn't see them or hear them or pay attention to them. Yep. And so we're not victims of this kind of oh my God, suddenly
blindsided. Yeah.
I got blindsided, or even like we got blindsided with a global pandemic. I mean, yes and no, we didn't. I mean, when you look beneath the surface, it's like,
right.
No, we didn't.
The information was there and most of us were avoiding it.
Exactly. So now it's like, pow. So it's like, okay, great. Now deal with it.
Yeah. This is awesome. Thank you. I feel like time just disappeared and flew by. I think we should do another one of these and keep going, but I'm just curious, for wrapping up, what do you want to leave men with?
I want to leave men with, I alluded to this earlier, the power of their heart, and that their heart, in the deepest places inside of them, the things that they may keep to themselves and manage within themselves, with good intention, that there is love and support, and that is available and trying to pour into, and that they're not alone within that, and that there is honor and there's power within revealing their heart and getting more in touch with their heart, and to speak to but what about my whatever, my goals, my missions, and my experience, not my philosophy, and my personal experience and my experience, that has only exponentially increased power, effectiveness, performance, leadership, relationship, being the man that you want to be. So that's my invitation to men, wherever they're at in this, discussion, to just really encourage a deepening in heart, especially at this time in our history and evolution.
Thank you. Two things just stood out for me. The word managing and the word honor stood out as you were talking, right? And the managing, like needing to manage on your own, and that sense of isolation and shame, right? That a lot of times men hold on their own. I really appreciate you speaking to that it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be that way. And it's not the most empowering way.
No. And that actually, right, there is honor, like you said, and coming forward and revealing and connecting at a deeper level. And there's even more power. I know, again, in my spiritual practice, there are a lot of men who come from these high powered places. And there is this transition that they often go through around, what is that saying? It's like, we push until something pulls us, or there's a sense of exhaustion from having that driving will for so many years as a leader, as a CEO or whatever. And then to realize actually that there's wind at our back, right? That there's even more power possible when we actually let go of that management or that forcing and thinking we have to have the answer. So,
the deepening into the heart, the surrender only integrates itself with the will, and it actually takes the will to higher levels of power, not lower. It doesn't take away from the strength of one's will. It actually adds more power to the will. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today. How can men find more of you?
My website is orenharris.com, ORENHARRIS.com. And I share a lot on Instagram. My Instagram handle is @OrenHarris. And I share a lot on my website, or on Instagram. And so Instagram and my website are the two places.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and it gave you something to consider and explore in your life. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to ShanaJamesCoaching.com/quiz or text the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 to get a sense of how you can become a better lover and leader. You'll start to see how you can be both more respected and desired in your unique and genuine way. If you don't feel as confident or as excited about life or love as you'd like to be, this quiz is a really great starting point and will guide you toward a more passionate love life and a more inspiring and successful career. So again, text ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 or head over to ShanaJamesCoaching.com/quiz. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.